My name is Saman De Silva. I'm a first year at the college. I use he, him, his pronouns. Thank you. And to give you all some background on this event, I'd like to ask you all to consider the first time you heard or learned about climate change. For me, it was talking about how we polluted the atmosphere with greenhouse gases, how we are degrading the ozone and we're creating a heat-trapping blanket on our atmosphere. When I thought this, and when I was taught this, I was overwhelmed by a sense of fear that was soon abated by the understanding that climate change was a problem for tomorrow. All we have to do is mitigate the issue, and it'll all be solved. Or at least so I thought. What I failed to understand was the human toll of the climate crisis. While we, in many parts of America, especially in Harvard, can sit in lofty ivory towers, fearing eventual sea level rise and climate change, there are many communities globally, communities in America, and communities just outside this campus that do not have this privilege. For too long, people from these communities have been neglected and left outside of the mainstream environmentalist movement. I hope that you all will join me today in deeply listening to these stories throughout this event and challenging your conventional understanding of climate change. These speakers' stories are emotional and personal, and I invite you all to feel your emotions and be vulnerable and share this space together.
Hello, everyone. I guess I'll get started. I grew up on the Hoopa Valley Indian Reservation, which is the same land my people have lived on since time immemorial. Through the reservation runs the Trinity River, a blue, swift stream that sits at the bottom of distant mountains. My family taught me that the river reflects the health of our community because it provides us food, joy, fresh water, and prayer. I grew up looking at my reflection in the Trinity River every day, my face smiling back at me with the serene hills in the background. Until there came one point in the summer when the river became too low and too filled with algae for me to see my reflection. The work of advocacy embodies the parts of our life that we value the most. And as advocates, we learn to turn anger into action when we feel these values are being threatened. My meals at home regularly consisted of locally gathered or hunted foods. I remember when I was a child and my head could barely see over the kitchen table, and there would be fillets of bright pink salmon laid out. My small hands were tasked to rope the ends of the salmon fillets to be tied up in the smokehouse that we filled with fresh-caught salmon every year. While I stringed the salmon, my aunties seasoned, and my great-uncle taught my cousins how to properly fillet a salmon. In the kitchen, there were 3 generations present, and each generation was passing down their knowledge to the next. As I grew up, I slowly began to see my traditional food disappearing from the dinner table, and we began to rely more on government commodities. My tribal culture has been fundamental to shaping who I am today. I owe most of my strength and confidence to my coming-of-age ceremony, which we call the flower dance. Becoming a woman in my tribe is honored with a 10-day ceremony for girls after they had had their first menstruation. Menstruation is viewed with such high esteem in my tribe because it shows the power women have to bring life into this world. This ceremony affirms the matriarchy in my tribe, but it is being impacted by climate change as the ceremony is land-based. I had to postpone my flower dance for 2 years. The first was due to the California drought that made it difficult to gather all the natural materials needed for my ceremony, and the second year because of the COVID-19 pandemic. It pains me to think about how close I came to not being able to practice this beautiful ceremony. The river plays a central role in the flower dance, and without the river, the ceremony would not be complete. During the last 3 days, the flower dance girl runs to multiple river spots to say a prayer and sing her song. During these 3 days, she is introducing herself to the river, who we view as a valued member of our community. Because of the nourishment the water contributes to our shared ecosystem. These last 3 days are the most difficult for the girl because over the previous 7 days, she has been asked to undertake tasks she may have viewed as impossible before. At this time, the river is crucial to restoring her strength, and it is the first step to building a relationship with the river. By taking these moments with the river to reflect and build strength, the flower dance girl is learning how to replenish herself when facing adversity. Also, the flower dance girl is introduced to the matriarchs in the tribe. She works alongside the medicine woman to learn the various medicinal purposes for local herbs, self-care, and the purpose of all our tribal ceremonies. In my experience with the flower dance, having this opportunity to see my tribe come together showed me that I am capable of accomplishment on my own, but when I need support, my entire tribe is encouraging me. Being from a matriarchal community, I learned from an early age that my role was to be a leader in my tribe. My mom served on the Hoopa Tribal Council, which, for those of you who may not know, in the United States and Canada, Native tribes have a sovereign status. Tribal nations have been practicing their own forms of government since time immemorial. When European colonization threatened our tribes, we used our knowledge and government to our advantage. Political negotiations became the vessel for survival as we reestablished our sovereignty. Today, tribal nations have a government-to-government relationship with the United States, allowing for us to have rights to our land, form our own legal systems, and represent ourselves when negotiating with other nations. As a councilwoman, my mom traveled to the state capital, Washington, D.C., and other reservations to advocate for the Hoopa tribe. Being a single mother, my mom would take me with her along her journeys. By bringing me with her on her conference trips, my mother affirmed that I also had a right to enter these political spaces. As of 2018, Sheris Davids and Deb Holland became the first Native American women to be elected into Congress, introducing the matriarchal power from tribal nations into the U.S. government. As voters, prioritizing Native voices in government is so important to the future of this country. We, Native people, are the future to a world without climate change. Tribes have practiced complex forms of self-governance without capitalism, which provides a perspective to move away from colonial structures and begin to live more sustainably. When I was 8 years old, I remember watching my mom practice her speech to the California State Water Board advocating for the removal of the Klamath Dam. The dam causes low water levels in the Klamath that jeopardize the salmon migrating to the Trinity. In my tribe, we understand the ways the ecosystem interweaves with each other. We know that if we take too much from one resource, it will deplete another. As a tribe, we went to the California State Water meetings to advocate for the board to create water policies that reflected this philosophy. As I watched my mother prepare her public testimony to the water board, I felt inspired and I ran to my room to begin working on my own speech. When I told my mother about it, she happily agreed to take me with her to provide my testimony. Ever since this foundational moment, I have been presenting speeches to the California State Water Board alongside members of my tribe. During the California Water Board meetings, tribal sovereignty was largely ignored. I have seen the Water Board shut off the mic of the tribal chairperson when they went over the allotted time. In moments like this, I felt a great sense of anger because it is a reminder of our oppression. At just 8 years old, I felt this hostility. I provided my testimony to a predominantly white male board while standing on a podium that I needed a stool to reach the mic. My body was shaking, and I felt the sadness swell in my gut. Providing my testimony is an experience that allows me to move through this pain, to develop my voice, and to learn how to articulate the injustices my tribe experiences in our daily lives. As I stand here today, I am happy to say that as a result of the Karuk, Yurok, Hoopa, and Hoopa tribes' political advocacy, the Klamath Dam is in the process of being removed. This will be the largest dam removal in history, and it will restore the salmon run and ecosystem in Northern California. The Klamath Dam, created to divert water to farmers and ranchers, caused the fish kill in 2002, reporting over 35,000 predominantly Chinook salmon. Thousands of bodies of salmon lay dead and rotting on the beds of our rivers. This was a moment of deep mourning for my people. As my mom says, when you give tribal people their rights, They will protect the earth and do right by the world. Native people have been effectively tending the land for centuries. This is seen in California fire records that show that traditional native land management systems have shaped the evolutionary course of plant species for at least 12,000 years. Specifically, the practice of controlled burns by California tribes has influenced the biological and geological structure of flora and fauna. Tribes continue to tend the land in a good way by creating high-quality forest management plans, water quality control plans, restoring controlled burning practices, and healing rivers through dam removal. I bring up this history because I think it is important to recognize how much the Hupa, Yurok, and Karuk tribe have created in environmental justice and rights since we were set back by colonialization. As tribes continue to practice their sovereign rights, it gives me hope for our shared future. Native resistance has been leading climate change initiatives, and we need allies. A great example of allyship is students at Tufts University assisting the Yaktun Sioux tribe in South Dakota to research water quality risks. These students are being given the opportunity to work under the Yaktun Sioux people and learn from their traditional knowledge systems. Universities are supporting tribal nations' fight against climate change, but where is Harvard on these initiatives? The Charter of 1650 holds Harvard responsible for uplifting and providing space for tribal nations. In 1650, Harvard College promised the Massachusetts tribe a free education in exchange for land. This agreement was also made in light of Harvard's financial bankruptcy and the federal government's willingness to fund educational institutions that would, quote, kill the Indian, save the man. The goal of the charter was to destroy tribal cultures, like my own. In this historical context, Native voices in the present need to be uplifted. The funding from the federal government that Harvard received for the Indian College is in part why this institution is still here today and is now the richest university in the world. Yet, Native people don't see any of Harvard's resources going towards their tribes, and this needs to change. There is a plethora of traditional knowledge that is ignored by the field of science due to racism against Native peoples. Climate change is here, and we don't have time to waste. It is time to finally invest in Native people to lead us out of this environmental catastrophe. Thank you for listening to my story.
Hi, thank you for everyone for coming out here today. My name is Dio Saavedra, and I'm here to introduce Ricardo Marrero. Ricardo is a Puerto Rican Iraqi sophomore in Courier House with a passion for public health and data analytics. He grew up watching Puerto Rican people like himself face consecutive crises, including hurricanes and government collapses. And his story describes the hurdles of being neurodivergent in his fight to implement meaningful innovation to the healthcare access and delivery structures for the island's most vulnerable patients. He calls for an invigorated climate change action model that prioritizes the most vulnerable victims of climate-caused disasters around the world, highlighting the gravity of climate change's unnoticed consequences in the global south and encouraging individual action under a unified front.
All right, let's do this. My name is Ricardo Marrero El Attar, and I am a storm breaker. What is a storm, if not an infinite amount of infinitely small droplets of rain or molecules of wind that swirl and shatter the world it strikes? My story sits at the intersection of two worlds. Physically, my home, my island, Puerto Rico. Mentally, ADHD, OCD, GAD, and short-term memory loss. Unaware of my mental storm during my upbringing, I was taught by my island community optimism, passion, and hope. Todo bien, poco a poco. These phrases, they're home to me, saying that despite the odds, despite the conflict, all is good. One step at a time. December 19th, 2022. When I heard the news that Hurricane Fiona had descended upon my home, I knew right there that these pillars of my world's stasis would soon topple and fall. Sitting there in my organic chemistry lecture, I watched as the memories forced their way back into my head from 5 years ago, and they wouldn't let go. I was 14 when I watched Hurricane Maria destroy every instance of life and beauty in my home from a television screen. September 21st, 2017. Sitting there in my grandparents' living room, holding my sisters tight with tears in my eyes, I watched as the roads shattered beneath people's feet. I watched as people searched for bodies on rowboats down the flooded city streets of San Juan. I watched hell overcome my island. ¿Cómo se dice? And I watched it through the foggy pixels of a screen, desperately waiting for news from the radio. Are they alive? Are my parents alive? My friends, my community, are they alive? Or have they been reduced to mere numbers on a casualty list? I returned to reality in the blink of an eye. But as the teardrops flooded the lecture floor, I thought, do I stay in class and move on? Or is it worth doing something, anything, with this time? My brain chose for me. And soon enough, I was racing my fingers across my keyboard as quickly as I could during my organic chemistry lecture, writing emails to every professor, every connection, everyone I knew, begging for help. I reminded myself, todo bien, poco a poco. I sent 70 emails that day, but I cared most about one. A government liaison, a mentor from a previous incomplete project, who that project was crucial, now more than ever. I begged her to try again, citing the horrors that I had seen. I begged her to let me in. The breaks between emails were my chances to cry, but only for a moment. Not when I have hope, not when I have a chance, not when I have a reply. A reply returns. It's her. She responded. This is my opportunity. This is my chance. She's ready. She's going to... What? She responds in short sentences. No header, no Zoom link. She says, the hospitals are running. The doctors are working. Everything is fine. What? This is the government telling me straight to my face that everything is okay, while I hear on the news that Salinas is flooded, that San Juan is powerless, the hospitals are powerless, the emergency rooms are empty, the patients don't know where to go. What? Within 30 seconds, I reply immediately, citing everything that I'd seen, everything that I'd heard, begging for clarity, begging for answers, begging for a meeting, message sent, and I wait. And I wait. And I wait. And just like that, she's gone. My one chance, my one opportunity to do something, to truly help my people, gone. My neurodivergence made it worse. I would soon compulsively stay up night after night trying to find solutions. I wouldn't eat. How could I? How selfish of me. There's food right here in front of me, fresh food on the table, while my neighbors, my family back at home can't feed themselves. My family says to work, but how can I? How can I work while people are dying? Is that not on me to put everything that I can, every hour, every minute, to build something as fast as I can, to do something as big as I can, as much as possible? Is that not optimism? How could I control my head when I woke up every morning hating the way that it refused to work? There was so much to do, but so little time. And if I put the time, then what do I do? What do I build? How do I build it? What do I do? I'm getting distracted. I need to study. I need to work. I need to focus. I'm getting distracted. I need to do something. I need to try something. I can't. What do I do? It's a convoluted, tightening chokehold of interweaving mental fabrics that constrain my every ability to think and breathe, and I fall. The storm settles around me into the eye of the hurricane and I fall. There's nothing I can do. I'm hopeless. September 21st, 2022, 48 hours after Fiona, I lay there on my bed, paralyzed from fear, frozen by the fear of the thoughts in my own head, when a flicker of light shines through the eye of the storm. My research mentor responds to one of the emails that I had sent in panic. She received my plan and she wanted to help. I go from 0 to 100 in a panic. We meet in person for the first time. I explained to her every concern, every idea, every thought that had ran across my head, everything. Within 1 hour, we have revolutionized my old idea and turned it into a plan of action, ready to go. One more chance, one more opportunity to push. Our team has no name, no website, no LinkedIn, no funding. But what we have is hope. We have a mission, passion, a plan. With no help from the government, we are incubating a database system that delivers life-saving healthcare accessibility information and data to every cell phone on the island. It's not perfect. It's not going to save Puerto Rico, and it's sure as hell not going to stop climate change. But that's the thing about climate change, isn't it? As much as my brain blinded me to believe that I was hopeless and alone and that there was nothing I could do, I cannot be hopeless because I am not alone. And the same way, as much as the world blinds you to believe that there is nothing that you can do and that your impact on climate change is infinitely small, you cannot be hopeless because you are not alone. Look around you. Every person here had the opportunity to move on, had the opportunity, oblivious to the messages we are trying to convey to you today, and yet you are here. That is evidence that you can fight too. And all that is missing is the push. Your memory, your attention, their gifts, use them to fight now before Boston floods like Salinas. Use them to fight now before New York goes powerless like San Juan. It's not about taking action broadly, it's about taking action now. We can all be storm breakers. An infinite amount of infinitely small raindrops. If, and only if, we all form one storm. Thank you.
Aloha, everyone. My name is Kali'i Noa Maeva. I have the honor of introducing my sister, Kiani, tonight. Kiani Akina is the daughter of Alan and Leanne Akina and sister to 7 siblings. She's a sophomore in Elliott, originally from Kahuku, Hawaii. In her story, she reveals the climate struggles and environmental injustices of the Pacific through sharing her Hawaiian culture and history. Kiani envisions a just and equitable world that is centered around indigenous and Pacific knowledge to better care for our land and water through practices like Aloha Aina and Hawaiian Kilo. At Harvard, she plans to study environmental science and public policy, serves as the president of the Hawaii Club, and is a winger on the women's rugby team. Please welcome Kiani Akina.
So where I am from, when somebody greets you with aloha, you always greet them back with aloha. So I ask you, after I give you my love and my greetings, to echo back with aloha. Harvard, friends, family, students, and faculty, aloha! Aloha! So before I share my story with you today, I am going to open with a hula, protocol hula that was done on Mauna Kea, which we will get into in my talk. But yeah, this might be a little different than any hula you have seen before because it is a more ceremonial and protocol hula, but yeah, here we go. All right. Thank you for allowing space for me to share my culture with you all today. Kiani Ku'ule Momi Akina. This is my full birth-given name, which was given to me by my great-grandmother, Viola Ku'ule Momi Clark Akina. My tutu gave my siblings and I our names. Today, I want to focus on the meaning of my first name, Kiani, which is a flick or a gentle overhead wave in hula gesture. I began dancing hula in the first grade when I was around 6 years old. I've been dancing hula ever since then, and I could spend hours and hours sharing lessons and stories that I have learned from dancing hula with you. But today I will share how hula brought me to my love for the land and for the environment. Every time I have danced hula, I have always felt connected to the land that I was standing on. But I began to feel a deeper connection to land when I realized that the land beneath my feet was not only biotic, but that it was also breathing and carrying a deep amount of mana, or as we say it in English, power. After my tutu passed away, I understood what my family meant when they would say that our ancestors are always with us. Iwi Kapuna, or the remains of our ancestors' bones, fuel and give life to the land. Through the extension of my tutu, I realized that land is a living relative that cares for and embraces our ancestors. This realization opened my eyes to many of the environmental injustices and crises in Hawaii. TMT, the 30-meter telescope, was proposed to be built on Mauna Kea alongside 13 other telescopes already built on the Mauna, or mountain. Mauna Kea is a deeply sacred space and mountain, and it's a holding place for many Hawaiian traditions. Mauna Kea is the piko, or the umbilical cord, of Hawaii Island, aka the Big Island, and therefore us, the Hawaiian people. I recognize that I am a malahini to Hawaii Island, but as a Hawaiian, what impacts one of us impacts all of us. The construction of the proposed TMT would displace native species and deplete the native ecosystem. So, Native Hawaiians, Hawaii locals, and allies from across the world came together to protest the construction of TMT. This protection campaign fought to protect native land and rights by halting the construction of the telescope and demanding that TMT never be built on Mauna Kea. Throughout the protest, many of our elders and young folk were arrested. I remember being at a protest with my family. I was upset, I was frustrated, and I was confused. Land was hurting, and that hurt me. My culture and my history was on the line, and that terrified me. How could entities continue to push for a telescope to be built on a Mauna when Native Hawaiians specifically and repeatedly said no? How could they arrest our kupuna? This movement brought the Lahui, or the Hawaiian nation, together, and it sparked yet another Hawaiian cultural renaissance. I want to return to the Hawaiian way of thinking of land as a relative. I invite you to imagine for a moment that this Mauna, or this mountain, is your loved one. Maybe that's a parent, a grandparent, a sibling, or a partner. Would you want a foreign entity to come in and deplete them of everything that they are? To rip out their heart, their kidney, and their lungs? Because this is exactly what I felt when I learned about the proposal for TMT on Mauna Kea. Because it threatened the life and the prosperity of a relative that I love for and care for so deeply, one that has given life to my family, my ancestors, and me. These environmental injustices sparked the kuleana that I feel to care for land. Kuleana means responsibility in Olelo Hawaii, or the Hawaiian language, but the implications of this word run so much deeper than that. Kuleana is a lifelong commitment to something. It is a commitment backed by aloha while expecting nothing in return. My kuleana brought me to the work that I did this summer with Kuleana Coral Reefs. We incorporated the indigenous Hawaiian practice of kilo into their coral restoration frameworks. Kilo is the Hawaiian practice of observing the natural world to conduct environmental stewardship. In Hawaiian culture, we understand that everything from and in between the mountain and the ocean are deeply interconnected. Hawaiians regard coral as the beginning of life, therefore making it our oldest living kupuna, or ancestor. This is the Kumulipo. It is the Hawaiian genealogy chant that includes our genealogy from time immemorial. Knowing that coral is our oldest living relative, we know that we have an inherent kuleana to care for it. In our work, we curated kilo sheets and took them on every single dive that we went on and made it an integral part of our scientific frameworks. We did it, and we can do it everywhere else. We incorporated indigenous science. Incorporating indigenous science looks like environmental stewardship. It looks like combating climate change. It looks like indigenous autonomy, and it looks like Hawaiian sovereignty. We can incorporate Hawaiian understandings of living with and caring for the land. We can begin to make climate policy that centers indigenous folks' voices and practices. By incorporating the understanding of aloha aina, ancestral abundance, Hawaiian kilo, and ancient water and land practices, we can mitigate the effects of climate change throughout the Pacific and throughout the world. With that being said, it is important that we call on our university to re-envision a reality for the Pacific that is equitable, livable, and sustainable for the Pacific and for the world. At this time, I call on Harvard to choose to reinvest funds into the Pacific through environmental organizations like the Pacific Climate Warriors at 350.org. With less than 50 of us here, Harvard must increase opportunities for more Pacific Islanders to attend this university. At a Native Hawaiian convention this summer, Auntie Twinkles said, "When you give somebody kuleana, you awaken their mana." The Pacific has been colonially overlooked but historically resilient in the midst of climate and environmental conversations. At this time, I ask you to think about the conversations that you have been a part of. Have the realities of the Pacific ever been included or discussed? Your answer to this question might be no. But today, you heard me. And today, you heard a Pacific voice. And because of that, you have kuleana. I invite you to take Dr. Hoag's nuclear imperialism class with me this upcoming spring. I am currently in their Pacific Worlds class, and there are only 4 other students there. Harvard needs to provide more Pacific Studies classes, and we need more Harvard students taking these classes. What if there were a lecture hall filled with hundreds of Harvard students, just like there are in Gen Ed 1094 Confronting Climate Change and PS 11? What if, just as we have rallied behind fossil fuel divestment, we rally behind Pacific voices? I see this for us. Do you? When we give each other responsibility, we can fulfill it. Do you feel what I feel, a burning in your chest or a turn in your stomach? Because that is what mana feels like. I hope that today you were able to learn how I connect with land and how my people connect with land. I invite you to dream a new dream with me, to reimagine a Pacific that is clean and that is safe. One where kalo and salt farmers can continue our traditional practices of farming without flooding or dry lands. One where families who live along shores in multi-generational homes will not one day be forced to relocate. One where Hawaiian fishers can continue our traditional practices of fishing and feed our communities. One where Pacific folk do not have to fear the loss of our islands, our languages, and our cultures to rising sea levels. I want you to see this, and I want you to feel this with me. As we dream together, let us expand what and who we include in our climate conversations and solutions. Mahalo.
Hi everyone, my name is Maibra. I'm a sophomore from Denmark, and I'm introducing a person that's very important to me. Gunhilda is a sophomore from Iceland, and I met her my freshman year at a moment where America felt hostile and foreign. Harvard felt competitive and intimidating, and suddenly there was this other Northern European girl with a strange name and a passion for environmental and economic justice. Ever since I met her, she has taught me so much about what it means to fearlessly fight for what is right, and what it means to actually care about people and the planet we live on. And she has taught me what it means to actually attend this university and to use this opportunity to do good. Today, she is going to talk about her involvement in the Fridays for Future movement back home in Iceland, and a funeral for a glacier that she attended there that has permanently melted and disappeared. I am, as always, excited to hear her speak. Gunnhildur.
Why are we attending school? If preparing for a future, if that future might not exist? This question underpinned the entire school striking movement around the world. I started striking in 2018 when I was 16 years old, only because just at the time I thought the other protesters in Europe were just really cool and I wanted to be a part of them. I also grew up in the shadows of Iceland's women's rights movement, which I always thought was really cool, and I secretly wanted to be there. I also really like nature. I grew up in a town on the south coast of Iceland. I went outside to play every day, no matter the weather, running around in the midnight sun, kayaking, and I was always amazed by the elements around me. Striking just seemed like the logical thing to do, and also to be a part of the cool kids. It was not that deep at the time. But suddenly the gravity of the situation started to sink a little bit more in. Every strike I went to, every speech I listened to, I learned more and more about this climate crisis, starting to feel really anxious about the future. When the movement had gathered enough momentum, we were invited to speak with the minister's cabinet, and boy, was I going to tell them. We presented our demands, a 50% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions before 2030, and many other reasonable demands supported by science. I expected them to say, of course, how could we not see this? I'm so sorry, we just thought the hockey stick ref was downside. I'm so sorry, we'll do what you say. But that was unfortunately not the case, and even a 16-year-old could see through their linguistic loopholes and circling answers. I was so confused. They seemed to understand the problem, but they were not responding to it or panicking like I was. After the meeting had concluded and they had formally rejected to sign our demands, I felt angry, and as I was walking out, I turned back towards them and I said, so what am I supposed to do? Should I even go to university if the future is going to be full of disasters? I had a lot of dreams at the time, but they all just felt so pointless. I felt my future shrink. The time span that I expected my life to be spread over didn't feel so much like I could be anything I dreamed of being, like everyone tells you. I kept going to the strikes, but it felt so strange, shouting words of panic and destruction. The world is expected to face a mass extinction event in this lifetime. How do you even start to think about this? I don't think I fully grasped the gravity of this sentence until August 2019, when it was announced in the news that Okjökull Glacier is the first Icelandic glacier to be declared dead after years of slowly disappearing from human-caused climate change. While being so focused on graphs and policy documents, I had forgotten about my dear old friends that I looked up to, the glaciers. Now, the difference between a chunk of ice and a glacier is that a glacier is alive, expanding and contracting in the winter and summer, breathing in and out the thousands of years of ice collected at the top that flows out to the bottom, creating these majestic crystal shapes and caves. Besides being insanely beautiful, 1 billion people depend on the water running from the Himalaya Glacier, and most of Iceland's hydropower energy comes from glacial rivers. But Okjökull is no longer moving, a dead piece of ice. There was a funeral held where scientists, locals, politicians, and activists walked up to the glacier and installed a plaque, a letter to the future, written by Andri Snær Magnússon. Ok is the first Icelandic glacier to lose its status as a glacier. In the next 200 years, all of our glaciers are expected to follow the same path. This monument is to acknowledge that we know what is happening and we know what needs to be done. Only you know if we did it. August 2019, 415 parts per million. Gathering there in the silence on the once glacier, now frozen soil, a sense of grief finally started to pour over me, realizing what was happening and what we were losing. I walked over a hill and silently wept, letting out all of the emotions that had been building up.
I felt the presence of a dying friend. Iceland is not a very big country with impressive colosseums or buildings to remember our past, but to me, a glacier is the best monument of history, a testament to the thousands of years we have lived on this island. Now this eternal monument is disappearing. I don't think our monkey brains have developed to be particularly attuned to the passing of length of time. We talk about time like we know what it means, like we can justly think about the next 100 years. I can imagine that a glacier has a much better sense of this, having watched our ancestor cradle to grave. While walking down from the funeral, overlooking Langijökull Glacier, Ökjökull's larger brother, I thought about what I wanted to do. The thing I kept thinking about was this word, we expect. We expect a certain future, we expect that under current emission pathways disaster will arise, but it's not certain, not if I decide to change the outcome. Seeing a glacier die can make you feel like disaster is already here, and that the world is going to be full of disasters, but by thinking that, I'm giving in to that world full of disasters. Instead of accepting that this is how the future was going to be, I decided to do anything to change this expected outcome. And I looked around me and saw that a lot of people were feeling the same way, walking down from the funeral. Really afraid, but more than ever, ready to do anything to change the expected outcome. So we started talking and we started planning for a future where we win, a future where we are a part of the millions around the world that want to change this expected outcome. And planning for a future where people care about the environment requires people to actually know their environment. So over the pandemic, I studied to become a glacier guide and worked over the summer showing people that glaciers are really magical and really cool. You want to switch the slide? Do you want to switch the slide? I'm so sorry. And again, maybe. It's my fault. Yes, this is a glacier guide. I always tell people after they learn to ice climb, solving the climate crisis is no biggie. It's really, really easy. And I also got more involved with politics with a more serious town, now serving as a vice member of parliament in Iceland, because our generation deserves a seat at the table when decisions are being made about our future. And yes, as is obvious, I did decide on coming to university in the end, now studying economics and environmental science, because I plan on a long career of implementing climate action and changing the way our society is structured. You're very welcome to call me unrealistic, but I'd much rather have too much hope than to give up. So when you see a news headline that says, the world is no longer expected to reach 1.5 degrees of warming, remember that this calculation is accounting for you sitting here and doing nothing. Walking away from here and yeah, not doing anything. The oil companies that pollute our atmosphere, they want so bad to kill our hope because that makes us give up on our ambitious solutions, targets, and compromise our solutions. And these are going to be strange times. The future will change no matter what, but it is up to us to plan for a future of winning and deliver the solutions we want to see. If you expect yourself to take action and make fighting the climate crisis a part of your lifetime mission, we can expect to see a much better future, and we can expect that Ökjökull will one day return. Thank you so much.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Joy Gonzalez, and I'm a sophomore at the college, and I have the pleasure of introducing Lisbeth Ibarra today. This is very exciting to me for two reasons. One, we're from the same city, and we met in high school at a social justice-oriented STEM program, and two, I'm her peer advisor at the college, and it's been so wonderful to remain in community with her. Lisbeth is a first-year student from Richmond, California, and is also a climate justice youth organizer. Her story is about how the fossil fuel industry has impacted her community and what it's been like to have an oil refinery in their backyard. She talks about Chevron's invasive placement that has caused her community to face high rates of asthma, cancer, and other respiratory illnesses, and how her community's resilience has given her hope to continue fighting for a future beyond Chevron. Lisbeth is concentrating in environmental science and engineering at Harvard. Thank you for telling one of our city's stories, Lisbeth.
I remember the first time school was canceled because of how unbreathable the air in my city was. I was 8 years old, already ready to be dropped off at school when I saw my older brother get off the phone with my mom after she instructed him to close all of the windows in our home. I watched him and my other brothers scramble to soak towels in water and cover all parts of our home with them. My mom called my brothers to let them know that none of us would be going to school that day because of how terrible our air quality was. This was the first smoky day I remember experiencing, but it definitely was not the last. My community's air was so toxic that school had to be canceled to avoid being exposed to it. Hello everyone, my name is Lisbeth Ibarra and I'm from Richmond, California, where the Chevron refinery has been a normal and very present part of life. It's literally in our backyard. I've been accustomed to the lifeless red tank spewing gray clouds on my daily commute, but didn't see anything wrong with this picture. Whenever anyone talked about climate change, it was talked about as something that only harmed the physical environment. You know, the turtles and the polar bears. It was only talked about in my science classes, but no one had ever talked about climate change as something that was harming people. This is why I wasn't able to draw the line between Chevron and my community and all of the injustices we face as a community, until I learned about environmental racism and injustice a lot later than I should have. Richmond is a beautiful, diverse, and culturally rich community that's made up of people who truly love their community. So I carry pride when I say that I'm from Richmond, California. We're a low-income community that's made up of some of the most hardworking and generous Black and Indigenous people of color, a lot of people that look like me. And it's no coincidence that Chevron's been able to pay their way out of being held responsible for all of the damage they've caused. A huge, deadly explosion leaving thousands of low-income people of color in the hospital is not normal. Constant flaring is not normal. A weekly alarm at 11 a.m. on Wednesdays to ensure that it works in case of another explosion is not normal. Oil spilling hundreds of gallons into the bay is not normal. Richmond's local high school mascot being the Oilers is not normal. Having some of the highest rates of asthma, cancer, and other respiratory illnesses in California is not normal. Yet this is my normal. All of these things have been a regular part of life in Richmond that have compromised my community's ability to breathe clean air. In a way, I had become desensitized to all of the harm Chevron's invasive placement in my home is responsible for because I never questioned any of it. After all, everyone in my community expected to develop asthma after having grown up in Richmond. None of this is normal. The likelihood of my family, friends, and loved ones developing asthma or cancer is increased simply because of our zip code. Most of my loved ones have asthma or some kind of respiratory health issue, and it's cruelly ironic that most of us also don't have access to sufficient health care. Kids in Richmond should be able to pick up their basketballs and grab their bikes when they go outside, not have to reach for their inhalers. As I talk about this now, it's interesting to think of the fact that I had no idea Chevron was hurting my community. They sponsor college scholarships for low-income students. They run STEM programs. They help pay my city's taxes. And they were at all of the community events to make it seem like they were a part of my community, not invading it. Chevron's done all that it can to make us feel like we need to rely on them for all of these things. But we don't, not at the expense of my community's ability to thrive. My own abuelita was a janitor at this refinery, working midnight shifts to provide for her family when she was diagnosed with cancer and passed away after years of being exposed to unbreathable air. Unlike most Chevron workers who don't live in Richmond, my grandma didn't have the luxury of coming from far distances to make tons of money and not face the consequences of Chevron like them. My grandma is just one of the things that Chevron has taken from me, and it fills me with rage and heartache when I think about it. Environmental destruction is not the only reason to do something about the climate crisis. You can't talk about climate change without talking about the people who have been living with the consequences of it. The climate crisis is about the irreversible harm being done to the people. My community is just one of the countless communities that have been on the front lines. But that's what you have to remember. It's only one of them. This is why it's so important to amplify and uplift the voices of those who have been facing the consequence for such a long time. those who don't have drinkable water, those who don't have clean air, those who are displaced because of natural disaster. Those are the reasons you should also care about climate change. If I'm being honest, mainstream climate activism many times fails to acknowledge the communities living with environmental racism and injustice. This is why I was hesitant to label myself as a climate activist for such a long time, because I didn't see communities like mine being uplifted. I thought that climate activism was just showing up to protest and holding up signs that put blame on those using plastic straws and driving gas vehicles, since this was all I saw and this was all I associated climate activism with. I didn't see myself fitting in this picture, but that changed when I realized that I didn't have to be at a mass climate strike to do something that mattered. I learned that there is great power in storytelling and having the ability to tell my truth and to tell Richmond's truth. However, I do want to point out that I've told this story before. I've told it firsthand to countless local and global leaders who have failed to protect my community and, quite frankly, my future, all of our futures. No matter how many times I've told this story, though, I've been told by powerful people that they're okay with all of the harm being done to my community through their lack of action. But all this has done is give my community and I more reason to continue. Chevron and all industrial polluters, for a fact, see my community as a sacrifice zone. They see my community as disposable, and they've shown us that they devalue life. They devalue my life. They devalue my friends' lives. They devalue my family's lives, and they devalue the life of every single person in Richmond. So I'm here to tell a story that doesn't just belong to me. It belongs to my entire community. This is a story of resilience, because no matter how much or for how long Chevron has threatened our land, soil, water, and health, no matter how much Chevron has shown us that they have no remorse for their wrongdoings, there has not been a day where I couldn't look to my community for help. No matter how much we're made to feel powerless, and no matter how much stakeholders try to silence us, they can't and they won't. There's so many ways to take climate action that aren't just striking at mass actions, such as making art, writing poetry, and dancing. But the one that's played the biggest role in this story is listening. I took part in a project this past spring called the Richmond Listening Project, where all we did was listen. No interruption, no biases, just hearing what everyday community members in Richmond felt towards Chevron. I was able to hear a collection of stories from voices I had never heard before. Immigrant parents, senior citizens, students, healthcare providers, teachers, everyday community members. From this came a series of 10 podcast episodes where we put these stories together and started conversations of harm, grief, and resilience, and resistance, highlighting the countless ways Chevron has hurt us, but also highlighting the beautiful ways in which the community has come together to hold them accountable. This project taught me that stories are valuable, as it allowed me to learn about the history of Chevron's toxic relationship with my city and how everyone in my city envisions a future beyond Chevron. Listening is a powerful tool, especially if you come from a place of privilege. It is the tool you should be using. You should be amplifying and uplifting the voices of frontline communities in order to learn what we need and in what ways you can help. If you've never considered yourself a climate activist because you don't feel that you fit the box, I challenge you to reconsider that. I challenge you to see where you fit in this movement, to use the things that you love as forms of resistance. But most importantly, I challenge you all to listen. Thank you for listening to me.
Hi everyone, my name is Ina Bupalam. I'm a junior in Kirkland House and I'm from Lincoln, Nebraska, which is why I'm so excited to introduce my good friend Lucy Tu, who's also from Nebraska. Lucy Tu is a junior in Winthrop House, originally from Omaha, Nebraska and Wuhu, China. Her story is about the impact of devastating drought and wildfires on agricultural communities in the Midwest. She highlights pervasive mental health stigma and barriers to mental health care in rural areas, as well as the relationship between climate change and heightened psychological health issues among the affected communities. At Harvard, Lucy studies sociology and the history of science with a secondary in neuroscience. She's a health and science writer using her work to uplift underrepresented voices and untold stories. Her writing on health equity and environmental health has appeared in The Lancet, The Guardian, Healthline, the New England Journal of Medicine, Discover magazine, and among many other publications. Also, just a quick note, Lucy's story includes discussion of some difficult topics, including self-harm and suicide. If this is uncomfortable for you, we encourage you to step out and take the space that you need. But without further ado, please welcome Lucy Tu.
I'd like to start by painting you all a glamorous picture. It's 7:37 a.m. in mid-July, so the sun has already broken through the horizon, and the temperature is at a fairly cool 85 degrees Fahrenheit, and you're dragging yourself through endless rows of corn stalks, yanking the flowers off the top of each stalk so you can prevent self-pollination. And if you're as short as I am, you're doing a lot of jumping in order to reach the top of those husks. Your workday starts at 5 a.m. and ends anywhere between 11 a.m. to 6 p.m. Either way, you're a bucket of sweat by the end of the day. This was my life on the farm. I'm originally from Nebraska, a state where cattle outnumber humans 3-to-1. And for 2 summers in high school, I worked on a farm in rural Nebraska, detasseling corn. And at the end of each shift, bucket of sweat and all, I'd visit my best friend, a beautiful milk chocolate colored cow who 15-year-old me decided to name Hamburger. Rest assured though, I did make human friends those 2 summers too. So first there were the 7 other 15-year-olds I worked in the fields with, and then the family that owned the farm. Farmer John, his wife Patricia, and their wild 4-year-old daughter Honor. Days on the farm can become kind of mundane, so you find these little ways to inject joy, like how Honor and I would spend my lunch breaks drawing pictures of our farming family. And I like to think she's an abstract artist because I've never had blue hair and I'm the same size as the 1,400-pound cow in this drawing. Or as another example, to celebrate my 16th birthday, John and Patricia threw together this amazing barbecue for all of us students. And at the barbecue, they served hamburger with a capital H. I want to emphasize that John and Patricia did not know that we'd just eaten my best friend. And in fact, when I made the big reveal to them, they insisted that we take a moment of silence. So there were the 11 of us, our bright orange vests and our overalls covered in dust and dirt from the fields, our clean hands clasped together, sitting around a picnic table that was full of splinters. This is a glimpse into the place that I used to call home. And the backbreaking work we did those 2 summers bonded my farming family. We championed the honest labor, do-it-yourself attitude, and our self-sufficiency. But today, John's farm looks nothing like the place I used to love. For the last 2 years, Nebraska has been in the throes of a record drought that has transformed miles of rich cropland into infertile dirt. And this spring, wildfires tore through 140,000 acres, 300 of which belonged to John and Patricia. Their livelihood and our home had been decimated. But interestingly, many Midwest farmers still say they don't believe in climate change, and they say they view outreach from environmental advocates with heavy suspicion. So suddenly, those very values that my farming family had always celebrated, our self-reliance and our individuality, we're putting our well-beings at risk. What does this mean for us as advocates? I've led workshops across the Midwest with middle school and high school students, teaching them how to incorporate environmental justice into their own hometowns. And here's one of the opening questions we pose. Climate change has deeply hurt the rural Midwest, but a lot of farmers still don't believe in it. If you were talking to one of these farmers, how would you start a conversation about climate justice? I promise not to cold call, but think about your answer and compare them to some of the common responses we receive from students. Interestingly, we ran a very similar survey with farmers in the Midwest whose croplands had been destroyed, asking them what would be most helpful for them to hear in the aftermath. And these are their responses. Now, most, not all, most of the student responses are reasonable because climate change and its effects in many ways are not things that we want to sugarcoat. But here's why how we start the conversation matters. In the summer before I came to Harvard, I had one of those environmental justice conversations with Farmer John, who at the time did not believe in climate change. And he told me that he had read the research, he talked to the advocates, he'd spoken with other farmers, and he said that he understood the issue. But he said that what they had to understand, what we had to understand, was that this farm had been in his family for 5 generations. It's the place where his father had raised him and where his father had passed away. It's the place where he got to become a father and watch Honor take her first steps. You know, the farm was the place that he got to become a dad to a new group of 15-year-olds every single summer and give them the most unforgettable barbecue that they've ever had. And he said that when people told him, climate change is inevitable at this point, or the situation will only get worse, to him it sounded like they were saying, abandon the farm and run away. And for him, running was not an option. Now, given the choice between staying and fighting for my home or running away, I would love to say that I have stayed and fought every single time. But the truth is, for the first 2 years I was here at Harvard, I really rejected that past rural Nebraska me. Compared to my peers who spent their summers working in legislative offices or fancy research labs, the Lucy that wore the bright traffic cone-colored hat and the plastic poncho for detasseling corn felt silly. She was the opposite of the serious student and writer that I so wanted to be. So I stopped checking in with John, Patricia, Honor, and the rest of the farming family. And when I heard that wildfires had ripped through my home state, I kept running. I felt safe here in my Harvard bubble, sheltered just enough from the storm to put it out of my mind. And then in March, there was one night where I was going through a bunch of missed voicemails on my phone, and one was from Patricia. She said that her husband, John, had been hospitalized, that he tried to take his own life the night before, and she'd found him in the bathroom. And she said she knew the farm had been struggling that year, but that through it all, John had not wavered. I can do it on my own. I don't need any help, he told her. He wasn't going to run. I heard that voicemail for the first time 300 feet from where I'm standing right now, right outside the Smith Center. And there was a choice. You know, I could stay and I could fight for my farming family and for the place I used to call home, or I could run. And I wanted to run. You know, I played that voicemail over and over, and each time I just felt more like a scared little kid. And then I played the next voicemail, a message from Honor.
Hi, Lucy. I know you're really busy, but can you please call me? I don't know what's happening, and Dad's really sick, and I don't know what's happening, but I want to be able to do something. I want to do something.
here was John's actual scared little kid. And she's too young to understand climate change and all of its complexities. But she was telling me that she wanted to do something. And I think for the first time, I understood what John meant when he said running was not an option. Honor reminds me why how we start the conversations about climate justice matters. Because the statistics are important, and they're scary, and they're stacked against a lot of us. But when we focus only on the numbers, we forget the people who don't get to run. Instead of looking just for climate solutions, we need community solutions. Because investing into climate justice is not just about funding new green technology, but also mental health services and community support groups so people can talk about feelings of eco-anxiety and hopelessness. That's the first step to bridging that rugged individuality chasm and turning self-reliance into community resilience, into climate resilience. Last month, John and Patricia celebrated Honor's 6th birthday, and they served ice cream cake and orange soda and definitely not barbecued hamburger. And John's part of a support group of farmers now where they talk about sustainable agricultural practices, like minimizing soil tilling and using controlled fires to rejuvenate pastures. But they also talk about the hard moments, like when the soil is especially dry or when a farmer loses an entire herd of cattle. And John tells me that most of the time, when someone shares one of those hard stories, the first response is, how can I help? That's how they start the conversation. That's the first step toward weathering the storm together.
Hello, everyone. I'm Jalen. I'm a sophomore living in Lowell House, and I will be introducing our last speaker of the night, Osasenega Idahor. Osasenega, or Osase, as I like to call him, is a sophomore living in Quincy House studying environmental science and public policy on a pre-med track. He hails from Hyde Park, Massachusetts. Hyde Park is an environmental justice population in Boston and has a history of immigrant populations and manufacturing. Osase's goal is to reshape how we think about urban climate change, and he's very passionate about helping people. He spends a lot of his time recording and producing his very own podcast, The Climate Doctor, No MD. Through his podcasts and other extracurriculars, he hopes to tackle environmental racism and climate change. Osase is truly an inspiration to me, and I know he's going to inspire you tonight. So with that being said, please give it up for Osase.
Proverbs 12:25, anxiety weighs down the heart, but a kind word cheers it up. It's 6:16 a.m., and I'm late to catch my train ride to school. Again. So I hurriedly grab my bag, I slam the door, fumble for my keys, lock the door, and then I'm in a full-on sprint down the street. I mean, I'm dodging overturned trash cans, jumping over blotches of gum and cigarette butts, and I'm sidestepping takeout plates. I run across the street, barely slowing down as the cars barely stop in time. And by the time I do get to the station, I'm breathing so heavily from the high-intensity workout I've just done that I don't know what I just walked by. I zoom by an electric power plant, and I overlook it. I'm not even questioning whether I'm breathing so hard from the run or from the toxins in the air. See, back then, I would say you shouldn't be concerned by any of this, really, because this was actually my daily routine, so I was used to it. I overlooked the electric power plant, the nearby crabgrass, and the trees getting cut down because, well, I was too worried about getting to school, catching my train, the more important stuff. So at the age of 15, I was already jaded about climate action because, that's just life growing up in Hyde Park and communities like it. I didn't know something was wrong with the picture until I got out and off the train in Longwood, where my high school is. Longwood, the air felt cleaner, the grass greener, and Hyde Park was far away. See, Longwood is Boston's hub for wealthy medical institutions, but Hyde Park is just a neighborhood on the edge of the city that's predominantly home to communities of color. Longwood is an area where it just felt like the city cared more about environmental justice. So when the city announced in its 90-page climate resilience report that, rising sea levels are going to threaten coastal places like Longwood, downtown Boston, and our Fenway area, it was, easy to make a big deal about it in local advocacy. But what about Hyde Park? What about environmental justice in Hyde Park? I mean, if we really want to care about increasing urban tree canopy, right, why are we cutting down some of the most important trees in Hyde Park? After all, the people living in these neighborhoods, like Hyde Park, they're the most vulnerable to suffering the worst consequences of climate change. I mean, is it just that we do not care? So my brother, he answered that for me. We were on our way to our uncle's house in the suburbs. And the whole car ride there, I'm talking about how, I have this recycling initiative that I was going to start. I was going to make change at Hyde Park. I was going to start putting labels on public waste bins, hopefully encouraging people to make the right environmentally conscious decision. And I'm even tooting my own horn. I'm talking about how, I already got the approval of the Hyde Park Neighborhood Association. And somewhere in my rant, my brother stops me and he's like, we pull into the driveway and he's like, all right, cool. I'm glad that you want to recycle and reduce reuse. That's all cool, but what's that going to do to solve climate change? What's the point? And I'm silent. I have no response. Here I am, I think I'm the environmentalist, and I have no response from my brother. I step out the car, I look around the beautiful green suburb I'm in, and I think to myself, you know what? Maybe this is what it's all about. Why care about Hyde Park? Why think that little old me could do something about climate change? The hope for me came when I realized that my resilience is important, that local resilience is important. You see, my neighborhood, Hyde Park, is actively fighting against the cutting down of trees in Crane Ledge Woods. And at one of these meetings, people were pouring out their frustration, their anger into a hot mic. And I just felt the fight in me was energized. And I wasn't hope-filled because I thought that this was going to solve climate change. And I wasn't filled with hope because to be honest with you, I wasn't sure that we were going to get the trees preserved. I was still pretty jaded. But I understood that it's not my job to solve our world's climate crisis. But it is my job to take up the stand of the poor, to stand in the gap, and to not grow weary in well-doing. Yeah, because my faith tells me that's what I'm supposed to do. And that's all that matters to me if I can be resilient in my own way. But looking back, before I get too, I got to think back about what my brother said to me, and honestly, I'm grateful for what he said. My planned recycling initiative, it probably wasn't the way to fix Hyde Park. And it definitely wasn't going to solve the global climate crisis, right? But that doesn't mean that I should stop caring about Hyde Park. That doesn't mean that it's time for me to move to the suburbs, right, and think about what I could do there. So what my brother taught me that day was an important lesson. It's not that we don't care about communities like Hyde Park. We're just too jaded about what's going to happen to our vacation getaways, our tourist hotspots, the more important stuff, that we forget about what's going on right now what's going on right now on the front lines for the battle against the climate crisis. That means we're overlooking battles on the front lines of the war, right? But we're also overlooking the potential good stories, the good news stories, and the victories that we can create. Because in the middle of these places, these ignored battle places where the battle is the most intense, the stakes are the highest for the people who are going to face the consequences of climate change. And so by making an impact, right, a victory in these places, I believe we're going to be the most encouraged to last a little longer. But these victories, they start now. I know that you felt hopeless, anxious, jaded, frustrated, angry. And maybe it wasn't your brother, someone around you telling you that, all right, come on, bro, what's the point? Like a lot of people here, I came to Harvard not knowing which environmental group I was going to join. And I didn't know how I was really going to make an impact. And I thought that was the reason why I got here. Like, that was my whole MO, like environmentalist, I'm about to do this. But we have an opportunity right now to get involved with these local communities and make some good news. And I actually hope you're thinking right now, like, come on, this is Harvard, this is Disneyland. What am I gonna do right now to engage with these frontline communities? See, the thing is, you guys underestimate yourselves. You are inspiring people who interact with them already. You volunteered for the Y2Y homeless shelter. You volunteer with PBHA. You contribute to the Harvard Square homeless community. And you contribute to social justice efforts at large in Cambridge. See, these are the people who we need to engage more with in our discussions around climate change, because they're the people who will inspire us to create good news stories. So here's what we can do as a Harvard community. We were just gifted $200 million for the Salata Institute on Climate and Sustainability. $200 million. Now, we can have a reality where our think tanks and our brainstorming sessions are about carbon offsetting and carbon markets, and that's all cool, that's good. Or we can have an opportunity to give a mic to the voiceless and give a seat to the people who never have a seat at the table. They can add their unique field experience as the people who actually have to deal with the environmental threats we worry about all the time. They can be involved in the decision-making process, in the brainstorming process of new environmental knowledge that influences our research. See, we at Harvard, we have a fantastic opportunity to be a part of the solution and not the problem of gatekeeping. Who gets a say in determining what's important for us to focus on and who even gets at the table? So I know that some of you who are leading the Salata Institute are here with me right now, and I thank God for putting you here with me today. You see, now's the time for us to be humble. Now is not the time for us to let our elitist culture prevent us from collaborating with these marginalized voices. Because with them and their input and their knowledge, we can humbly serve them and bring about the badly needed infusion of good hope, good news, hope that our climate change discussions so desperately need. And look, I don't have all the answers, but I'm here today. You know, you're here right now. Let's talk. I just want us to think about, I know we're running late on a global scale to catch the train of global climate action, but in our rush, let's not overlook the good news stories we can create and the victories we can win. Galatians 6:9, let us not become weary in doing good, for at the proper time we will reap a harvest if we do not give up. Thank you.
Thank you all so much for bearing with us. I know that we're well over time, and that is telling that so many of us are still sitting here in this venue. You have taken an important step by merely coming to this event, and you have made Frontline Voices a priority in your understanding of the climate crisis. You're here 30 minutes after an event has ended, and you're showing commitment. I hope that you will follow the advice of many of our speakers from tonight. As Gunhildur, Ricardo, and Osa Senega have said, stay hopeful in spite of the challenges we face in the present and the future. Follow Kiani and Lemoni as they highlight Indigenous voices in climate science and climate action. Like Lisbeth, continue to listen to frontline voices and people who sit at the front of this issue. And as all of the speakers put so eloquently, take action. For the next hour, you will have the opportunity to get to know the groups and individuals who made this happen. Each partner group today will have their own table that will be set up in the back, and I encourage you to explore each and every opportunity and the diverse array of ways to get involved with climate action on campus. Food will also be set up on this side of the room, and the speakers will be tabling and having conversations with some of you in the audience. As I've mentioned many times, this event has been an incredible collaboration between our speakers, organizers, and environmental groups. And after working together for 8 weeks, we are thinking about how we can continue to build this community beyond this event. We are building a Harvard Climate Coalition, a space for all undergraduates, these speakers, these groups, and you, to take action and engage, to demand climate justice, to dream together about a sustainable and equitable world, to build a better future together. And I hope you will join us in creating this space. Finally, I'd like to give some special thanks to wrap up this event to some folks without whom this event would be impossible. Jeremy Ornstein and Najwa Makbul for training our speakers and helping shape these stories. Tarina Ahuja for inspiration of this event. Life Alive has graciously provided some bowls and delicious food for you this evening. And we'll just go through this and skip some of the applause so we don't have to kind of draw this out. But Tracy Daly and the Crossroads program for giving us this wonderful venue. The Harvard Social Challenge for sponsoring this event and our funding. Friends and mentors who have spent countless hours helping us shape this event. And our brilliant event organizing team and its coordinators. Now, the last person I would like to invite to the stage is my co-organizer, Michael Waxman, who has dedicated many hours to bringing everyone here and helping create this event. So please, a big hand for Michael. Now, I would like to invite all of our speakers back onto the stage for one last moment before we conclude this event. And we want to thank you all so much for joining us today for our climate change stories, for hearing our stories, hearing our voices, and hopefully taking action.